Okay.
Last year, my girlfriend Rose told me this story of her first time smoking marijuana.
Yeah. It was the second time, but the first time never counts. So we were in a dorm room, and we were... I don't know. We had a lot of dance parties in dorm rooms back then. And one of my friends put on Dan Deacon so that we could dance. It was the song Wham City, which was commonly played at drunken parties at that time in my life. And the song started, and suddenly I felt it hit, and everyone was standing up dancing in the dark, and I just felt my face start smiling, and I didn't necessarily want to be smiling, and I just couldn't stop, and I felt my face, like my smile lifting off my face. And at that point, I freaked out because I just felt like I had no control of my body. And I just got really, really hot. And I think I ran into the bathroom and probably started crying, and I think I spent at least the rest of the song, possibly the rest of the album, just crying in the bathroom. I felt like my body was on fire, and it was just like this really intense, pounding, kind of incessant, hot feeling created by this sound. And I think once it finally came off, I could come out, and I felt okay again.
That was my introduction to Dan Deacon, that story. I wondered what kind of music could have that effect. I would soon find out. What follows is the product of my attempt to get into Dan Deacon over the past month, which culminated with me taking in his May 22nd performance at the Warsaw in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. That's the disclaimer. I am no authority on Deacon. A month ago, I was unfamiliar with his work. I've tried to listen closely and experience him on the artist's own terms. I was unable to acquire Molly before the Warsaw show because I'm 30 and not as cool as I used to be, but I still experienced it with an open heart. I'm going to talk about what I hear happening in Dan Deacon's work and what it signifies about his worldview. I'm your host, Don Mirma. This is Quick to Listen. The first thing that struck me was the density.
I'm very obsessed with density, or at least I was on the last records. I'm sure I still will be on the new runs.
Everything is happening all at once, vertically, in terms of layering. There are so many rattling, popping, and percolating elements to the beat that it ceases sounding like a rhythm that would pair up with any familiar kind of dance. This density applies horizontally as well. There is relatively little growth and development over the course of a piece. They hit the gas in an instant and mostly stay there. It's like the pieces are dragged through time against their will. They would prefer to present a single, endless, climactic moment. Deacon often says that he writes music that can't exist in the physical world.
So that sort of got me like focused on making music that didn't really make sense in a physical realm.
So this makes sense. Classically minded composers, as they added elements, felt an imperative to keep things clean. It's a process analogous to simplifying a math equation through the elimination of pointless redundancies. This is achieved through counterpoint. Here's our last guest, Ray Lynch. It's also achieved through mastery of orchestration, how instruments sit together. Here's Russian composer Rimsky-Korsakov, who wrote the book on it. But that density is not the density I hear in Dan Deacon. His is a much cruder, more literal piling up of elements. Often different washes and arpeggio loops overlap in the same range, getting sonically tangled. Everything seems to be happening all at once, especially in this case in the high end. Here's a clip of Dan Deacon arguing with the engineers of the album Brahms. They wanted to shelf down the low end of a player piano overdub, which contains echoes and rattles that contribute little. He wanted to leave it in.
I mean, all I'm trying to say is you guys don't know the song. I know exactly how the parts go, how they go in. I've a lot of the levels have changed on the songs. This song, they cannot. And I think I know this track. We can do it.
You just want to do it yourself?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
But if I don't want to argue with you guys, I do want to also just get it done.
We just need to brighten this up. We need to we need to put a low pass on it and kill all the thud from the mechanisms, or put a high pass on it, kill all that.
I don't mind that. I think that's an inherent property of the instrument.
Okay.
I feel like you two have no faith in me. To be perfectly honest, I feel that way.
What?
I mean, I've
Okay.
So this density is clearly an intentional and important part of Deacon's aesthetic. The question now is why? Why is he so committed to his vision that he's willing to arguably go beyond the bounds of good taste in pursuit of it? For the answer, we have to acknowledge the psychedelic heritage of Deacon's music. In the 1954 classic The Doors of Perception, Aldous Huxley describes and analyzes his experience taking the hallucinogenic peyote extract mescaline. Huxley brought to bear his experience as a comparative religion scholar, a poet, and an erudite British gentleman. He endorsed this notion.
The suggestion is that the function of the brain and nervous system and sense organs is in the main eliminative and not productive. Each person is at each moment capable of remembering all that has ever happened to him and of perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. The function of the brain and nervous system is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge, by shutting out most of what we should otherwise perceive or remember at any moment, and leaving only that very small and special selection which is likely to be practically useful. According to such a theory, each one of us is potentially mind at large. But insofar as we are animals, our business is at all costs to survive. To make biological survival possible, mind at large has to be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain and nervous system. What comes out at the other end is a measly trickle of the kind of consciousness which will help us to stay alive on the surface of this particular planet. To formulate and express the contents of this reduced awareness, man has invented and endlessly elaborated those symbol systems and implicit philosophies which we call languages. That which in the language of religion is called this world is the universe of reduced awareness, expressed and as it were petrified by language. The various other worlds with which human beings erratically make contact are so many elements in the totality of the awareness belonging to mind at large. Most people, most of the time, know only what comes through the reducing valve and is consecrated as genuinely real by the local language.
Deacon's density is, I believe, an attempt to affirm the existence of, or even directly convey, that shimmering, endless reality of things, which our stereotyping thought language filters out. The reality which pedestrian music, or music made by pedestrian minds, ignores. Quote, temporary bypasses may be acquired either spontaneously or as the result of deliberate spiritual exercises or through hypnosis. Dan Deacon began my concert by leading the crowd in a chant. Daffy Duck's friend is your best friend's dad, and your best friend's dad is Daffy Duck. Daffy Duck's friend is your best friend's dad, and your best friend's dad is Daffy Duck. If I had scored Molly, I would have joined in. Chanting is a way of inducing hypnosis. Additionally, a moment of nonsense in a verbal induction is sometimes used as the place where the inductee goes under, as her conscious mind finds it impossible to keep track of the language sequence and agrees to go along rather than analyze. Later in the show, Dan Deacon led the crowd through a faux hypnosis/guided meditation that was much like this one, recorded from his NPR Tiny Desk concert.
So I'll just close our eyes and imagine that we're feeling, our body, our memories, and our consciousness are three separate things, and we're feeling them all equally. And our body and our memories are going to stay linked as one, but our consciousness is going to drift off into the ether. And when we open our eyes, we're going to have a new consciousness, but attached to our old memories, and we're going to be Martin Lawrence's character from the movie Bad Boys 2. So just, our eyes are closed, and feel from your feet, slowly rising up, your consciousness leave your body, and as it leaves, enters the new Martin Lawrence consciousness from Bad Boys 2, post-Bad Boys 2. Your dog has ruined your swimming pool twice. If you could just take your left hand and massage your left earlobe, and just, at your own pace and at your own rate, take a big, deep breath in, and when you let it out, just go, woosa. And when you open your eyes, you will be Martin Lawrence, this character from Bad Boys 2, but with your memories. So open your eyes at your own pace. Hi, I'm Martin Lawrence.
Do I think Dan Deacon was trying to hypnotize us? Of course not. But he kind of was. He was playing with the idea, and the music itself absolutely circumvents the rational, linear inner monologue that consecrates a narrow version of reality and clogs the doors of perception. Let's look at Dan Deacon's vocal techniques. For someone who describes himself as not being able to sing and who barely explores melody, it's pretty versatile. We have pitch shifting, massive vocodered inhuman choirs, cut up fragments, and chant. The lyrics also serve to disorient. When I Was Done Dying presents a surreal narrative, a flood of impossible to reconcile metaphors about being flung out of one's control into a transcendent state.
And like that I was torn out and thrown in the sky, and I said all my prayers because surely I had died.
following is from a website about the techniques used by cults to snare their members. Quote, disorientation and sensory overload may occur at about the same time when either too much information or too many sights and sounds overload a person. Put a person in a situation where he is fatigued and his senses are overloaded with non-coherent information, and the mind will go numb as a protective mechanism. It gets confused and overwhelmed, and logical faculties no longer work properly. This is what renders a person more susceptible and less critical to the information being received. Let's listen to some more.
But before she did that, she wiped off my own face. She said, "Better next time, don't worry so much." Without ears, I couldn't hear, I could just feel the touch. I never stayed softly the edge of a cable. I should have gone deeper, but I'm not so brave.
Aldous Huxley insists that while every hypnotic vision and mescaline experience is unique, they all belong to the same species. These antipodes of the mind exist and are the territories we visit whenever we are having these experiences. There we encounter, quote, landscapes as lovely as a lost Eden, where the colors are brighter and purer and yet make a softer harmony. Uncut precious stones possessing an interior light, or are they masses of transparent fruit hang from the ceilings? Huxley thinks we seek to manifest these heavenly visions in jewelry, stained glass, and sacred artworks of all sorts. One can hear this atmosphere of preternatural light, preternatural color, and preternatural significance in much psychedelic music. Huxley called the urge to transcend self-conscious selfhood a principal appetite of the soul. He said that, whatever the means, the need for frequent chemical vacations from intolerable selfhood and repulsive surroundings will remain. Maybe that hunger is satisfied differently today, thanks to millennials' preference for Adderall, Molly, and clubbing, over the hippies' preference for peyote pot and TM. Can transcendence be reached through such intense music? Aldous Samraj, who is a fascinating guru worth Googling and who was the spiritual mentor to Ray Lynch, our previous quick-to-listen guest, could have been describing a Dan Deacon show when he said this of the Western social script. Quote, they exploit the motor apparatus and the sympathetic nerve currents through hyper-excitation of the body, breath, and brain-mind. This has the effect of dulling the sensory apparatus, or suspending the left-sided nerve currents, thus limiting the depth of tactile and internal awareness. And it also sends the energy of the motor thrill downwards, away from the brain, towards the genitals and genital orgasm. You can see that this has gotten sexual, but the principles still apply. Adida continues, the Western sexual script tends to create a sense of release, and even emptiness when done to excess, in mind and body. I think that Dan Deacon's music seeks to create a sense of emptiness through hyper-excitation of the body. His career has been oriented towards maintaining a dynamic live show. At every show, he has a proven technique to get the crowd moving.
I've been doing like the make a circle and have a dance contest for a really long time now, maybe coming up on like 10 years. That's the early thing I do in the set that just shifts the focus from you don't have to look this way, you can look this way. It's one of my favorite things to do because it really breaks the ice and it gets people dancing right off the bat.
When I was there, I found the dance circle a bit unpleasant and manipulative, especially when paired with some of the darker undercurrents of some of his tracks, which I'll explore later. Obviously, it's worked every time for 10 years, but when you break it down, of course it would work. You only have to dance for 5 seconds before you tag the next person. At the end, since nature abhors a vacuum, the crowd will of course come flooding in to fill the circle. They'll be dancing because all the room's energy has been directed to that activity and it's previously been forbidden, only for those in the circle. But now the circle's everywhere. So why did Rose feel like she was on fire and couldn't stop smiling as she listened, stoned with friends, to Wham City? There is a monotonous, relentlessly anxious quality to Deacon's music that is unlike the yielding, reflective quality of most psychedelia. Maybe it's just a bad trip. In Heaven and Hell, Aldous Huxley notes that not all visions are of a profoundly still, lost Eden. He describes the hellish experience of a schizophrenic. Everything that, for healthy visionaries, is a source of bliss brings to Renee only fear and a nightmarish sense of unreality. The summer sunshine is malignant. The gleam of polished surfaces is suggestive not of gems, but of machinery and enameled tin. The intensity of existence which animates every object, when seen at close range and out of its utilitarian context, is felt as a menace. And then there is the horror of infinity. There is a horror to much of Dan Deacon's work. Think of the military march that underlies Wham City. It's like the lyrics are being said by some crazed army. His lyrics often convey a sense not so much of being transported, but of being hurtled somewhere strange and sometimes grotesque against one's will. Sometimes they're overtly hellish. Quote, "I've soaked my skin in the pits of hell, yet I can't seem to escape the smell of sea. Like gloom, it's smeared across my skin, like a dirty black rust in my melody." The reason for these occasional bad vibes is simple. Dan Deacon is a human being, and he sometimes feels anxiety. At the show I went to, Deacon mentioned that he was trying to ignore negative things written about him on the internet, that he was trying to relax. He then launched into learning to relax, which is still a dense, anxious number. Nonetheless, the same psychedelic will to transcend animated it. Deacon sometimes takes me through an experience not unlike this one described by Huxley. Quote, "When the visionary experience is terrible and the world is transfigured for the worse, individualization is intensified and the negative visionary finds himself at last reduced to being the agonized consciousness of an inspissated lump of matter, no bigger than a stone that can be held between the hands." It is worth remarking that many of the punishments described in the various accounts of hell are punishments for pressure and constriction. Dense music all around you compresses you. Think of the language we use for music that is spacious. It's airy. You can move through it. You can breathe. The detached, absurdist elements of Deacon's aesthetic have to be addressed, and here's where I start to sound more critical. They beg the question, is it all kitsch? Can self-transcendence really be provoked by compositions with names like Pink Batman, Snake Mistakes, The Adventures of Mr. Bumbershine featuring Dr. Witherbean, My Own Face is F-Word, Big Ol' Hat Was Ice Cream Time, Card Shark Nose Nose, or Shit Slowly Applied on Cock Parts? We've seen that Dan Deacon's work attempts to blow open the mind's restricting spigot by having everything happen all at once sonically. This may also mean the abandonment of good taste itself, or that critical voice. Maybe I just can't get over that hump. While he sat tripping on mescaline, Aldous Huxley caught sight of his own crossed legs. Quote, "I looked down by chance and went on passionately staring by choice at my own crossed legs, those folds in the trousers. What a labyrinth of endlessly significant complexity." Dan Deacon's music has the endless complexity, but is it significant? For minutes at a time, a piece will feel as a whole with the human condition. Natural, but then you hit a nugget of deliberate nonsense. Alternatingly, just as it all seems enjoyably trivial, then comes a big anthemic climax or a demand from on stage that we dance. Deacon's capricious dynamic of engaging with issues of depth, like death, or the idea of America, or learning to relax, before veering off into absurdism, becomes tiring over time and has the effect of trivializing the more serious themes. For example, take the hollered lyrics of Wham City.
There is a mountain of snow up past the big glen. We have a castle enclosed. There is a fountain. Out of the fountain flows gold into a huge hand. That hands are held by a bear who had a sick band of ghosts and cats and pigs and bats with brooms and bats and wings and rats that play big dogs like queens and kings, and everyone plays drums and sings about big sharks, sharp swords, beasts, bees, bees, lords, sweet cakes, mace, lace, ma.
It has the form of a real spiritual declaration. There is a mountain.
Because I've been to the mountaintop.
But then Deacon as narrator seems to enter, reminding us that none of it is significant, i.e., there isn't really a mountain, and then we get a childish parade of pigs and bats and wigs and rats. This is sonically supported by childish glockenspiel and Sega Genesis MIDI tones. I'll tell you what the problem is with that childish pink Batman, Spider-Man referencing aesthetic. Children don't engage with spiritual questions. They don't work through how to build relationships with their fellow humans. They don't process the dilemma of inevitable pain. They don't ponder the fate of mankind. Whether or not God is real, those issues are real, and they are what motivate the devout. Deacon's work alternatingly flirts with and mocks the outer baubles of spiritual life, while conveniently ignoring the realities that actually motivate spirituality. Wham City puts a chant into an infantilized context with bears and bats and glockenspiels and MIDI. Why? Hey, I don't think there's a heaven or a mountain with a fountain filled with gold out there, but I respect that longing. What am I supposed to feel as I dance along to the ironically triumphant sounds? Triumphant knowledge that I'm not a fool who believes there's a mountain? Do I just internalize the confusion and keep dancing? Why would I want to do that? The bottom line seems to be, don't kill the party. As a side note, if you would like a band that harnesses Deacon's psychedelic intensity but takes that ride to its natural conclusion through the ups and downs of real human experience, I recommend Akron Family. It is possible that Dan Deacon wants to take us on that ride, but simply doesn't have the skills to do it. I found this statement revealing.
And in high school, when I would write like horn parts for the horn players in my band, they couldn't play them. And not because they weren't good, they were great horn players, but because the parts weren't written for humans. They were written on a computer, almost for a computer. And I didn't know the limitations of the instrument. So I'd have jumps in range that couldn't be performed, or passages that were way too fast, and it was too difficult. And that carried over into college. After a while, I hated that.
In his first test as a composer, the young Dan Deacon chose to not learn how to write for instruments. That seems hubristic. He undeniably could have learned useful things about dynamics and effective layering from arranging real-life instruments, but he shut that door.
It's, I think, why a lot of people get into electronic music. You can constantly have sounds change, you can layer them on top of each other endlessly as much as your computer will allow.
When Deacon says that being an electronic musician means that he's not writing physical music,
making music that didn't really make sense in a physical realm,
I think he's simply in error. It doesn't matter if there's a laptop or a wooden box with catgut involved. All music is physical because it manifests as vibrating sound waves. The issues of the psychological effects of different harmonies, of space versus density and effective arranging that confront the traditional composer are sidestepped by no one. This Aldous Huxley passage seems appropriate. Quote, "The untalented visionary may perceive an inner reality no less tremendous, beautiful, and significant than the world beheld by Blake, but he lacks altogether the ability to express in literary or plastic symbols what he has seen." There's nearly always a droning root note. I noticed that underneath the busyness, the pieces were really simple, with nearly all of them centered on minutes-long, harmonically static repetitions of either 1-4 or 1-2 back and forth. Where are the odd time signatures, polyrhythms, movement in the bass voice, clean counterpoint, key changes? All this would help Deacon achieve that door-opening, overwhelming effect I think he's going for, but they've been neglected in his craft. To conclude, I have a confession. As a composer myself, there is something threatening to me about Dan Deacon's mad density. It's possible that I'm holding him to standards to which he doesn't hold himself. That is, I'm assuming that he would want to make full use of the tools available to composers to achieve his desired effects, But his music is so chaotic, reckless even, that it's entirely possible he doesn't see himself as a composer in the same sense that I've used the word. To me, to compose is to bring order to sound. My caring about announcing another artist's untidy layering of sound is not so grand a thing. I'm being such an aesthete, it feels small. I truly think it's possible that Dan Deacon, the human being, is more enlightened than I, Don Mirma. Huxley may have been describing Deacon when he wrote, quote, "I strongly suspect that most of the great knowers of suchness paid very little attention to art, some refusing to have anything to do with it at all, others being content with what a critical eye would regard as second-rate or even tenth-rate works. To a person whose transfigured and transfiguring mind can see the all in every this, the first-rateness or tenth-rateness of even a religious painting will be a matter of the most sovereign indifference. Maybe Dan Deacon has gotten there. I just wish his music could help me get there too."